So ecosystems are all about the transfer of energy. So today we're going to be talking about trophic levels and energy transfer. So here is a very basic food chain. So you'll see energy goes from the sun to the producer. In this case, that's grass. The grasshopper gets energy from the grass when it eats it. The energy is then transferred to the mouse when the mouse eats the grasshopper, which is transferred to the snake, the hawk. Then when the hawk dies, it gets decomposed by the fungi, and those nutrients get passed back to the producer to start the cycle again. Here's another food chain. We know it's a chain because it's just going in one direction. And you can see it starts with a producer, and everything after the producer is a consumer. So we actually have a way of labeling those consumers, and that is calling them by kind of their number. So the first eater we call the primary consumer. The second eater we call the secondary consumer. The third eater is the tertiary consumer. So it's always going to go in that order: producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. And then when anything dies, it gets decomposed by things like fungi, bacteria, worms, and that can return nutrients and energy to the soil. So, primary consumers are always herbivores because they're eating producers. They're eating plants, so they're always herbivores. Secondary consumers are often carnivores or omnivores, and tertiary consumers are almost always carnivores. Here is another food chain. So if we think about the owl is getting energy from the shrew, where is all of this energy starting from? Well, it's really starting from the sun. The sun is giving energy to producers. Producers are passing energy to primary consumers, and so on. Notice that the arrows are always pointing toward the thing that is eating, because that's the thing that's getting energy. That's really important, and that's a mistake that we saw many kids make. So take a look at this picture. Can you identify the producer? Can you identify consumers? Can you identify a carnivore? Can you identify an herbivore? How about primary, secondary, tertiary consumers? If you got them, fantastic. Here we have a producer. Everything that eats is a consumer. We have carnivores. We have an herbivore, the grasshopper. Primary, secondary, tertiary consumer. In this case, we actually call the hawk a quaternary consumer. Now, this is a little more complex. This is a food web. I know it's a food web because it's more interconnected, like a spider web. This is really how energy is passed in an ecosystem. It kind of goes all over the place. So take a minute, pause if you need to, and see if you can identify the things that are numbered on the right. So producers get energy from the sun and make their own food. They produce their own food. When a consumer eats the producer, some of the energy is passed on, but not all of it. What happens to all of the energy? Well, some of the energy from the plant is used to fuel the organism. It takes energy to just do normal cell processes. Some energy is lost as heat to the environment. In animals, some energy is lost as poop, and only some of it is stored in the consumer to be passed on. We call it the 10% rule. About 10% of energy is stored in the organism. A lot of the energy is wasted, and some of the energy is used. So, when a secondary consumer, carnivore, eats a primary consumer, an herbivore, it only can take that 10% of energy that's been stored. Again, only some of it is stored, the rest is lost or used. So that secondary consumer is getting even less energy, which is why we often see that those top level consumers have to eat a lot of food to stay alive because they're not getting as much energy and they also use a lot of energy. All right, so at the end of this PowerPoint, you should have a better understanding of how energy is transferred in an ecosystem, how we label different organisms based on the energy that they're getting in an ecosystem, and how things are interconnected through a food chain and a food web.